I'm asking parents a tall task to heal their own inner wounds so that then they can heal their children's.
How do you become aware? Our life is the mirror showing us, but we take it personally. We get triggered, we project.
So awareness is not a given that your partners or your friends will come to you with. Like, hey, I'm aware I'm an asshole. It has happened never. That's why we have relationships, because relationships are where you get to see the mirror, and especially parenting, unlimited opportunities to see how effed up you are. So it really depends on the person's level of truth seeking. Growth is so scary for many people because it's taking accountability for your own wounds. And we just would rather blame other people. It's so much more satisfying and easy.
This podcast exists because I love talking to people and I love going deep. The purpose is to plant seeds of inspiration. We enter a space of vulnerability and relatability. And what you realize is that we are so much more alike than we are different. To quote Ram Dass, we're all just walking each other home. And this show is just one step.
I'm Danica Patrick, and I'm pretty intense.
Today on the show is Dr. Shefali. She's a clinical psychologist. She got her doctorate from Columbia University. She specializes in integrating Western psychology and Eastern philosophy. She's a total expert in personal development, patterning, childhood, and she's really trying to bring awareness to how that affects us in our life. She's written 4 amazing books, 3 of which are New York Times bestsellers, including her 2 most famous books, The Conscious Parent and The Awakened Family. And what I love about Dr. Shefali is that, if anything, if you go look up anything on her videos on YouTube, things like that, podcast, she doesn't beat around the bush. She would say, like, I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to help wake people up and help people sort of step into their own awareness for themselves and be accountable. And the big angle is to look at the childhood and look at that patterning and look at that, how that affects you in life, but then become really accountable for it. And so the conversation was all about that. And we talked about triggers, projections, attachment styles like the anxious attachment and the avoidant, secure attachment style. And maybe by listening, you'll be able to identify with one of them, and also maybe start to identify with a pattern that you're in where you can identify with one of those. And then you go, oh, and my, boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife or partner is this, or maybe it's a work dynamic, or maybe it's a family dynamic, and start to identify and then be able to take steps to take accountability for your part in that relationship. And then, we kind of wrapped up by what transformation looks like. And that, at the end of the day, sorry guys, it's not pretty, but it's all on the path to happiness, which is what we're all looking for, in peace. Super dense informational show today. And I hope you have tons of takeaways and you take steps towards your own awareness and your own accountability. Enjoy the show. I am so fascinated with like human patterning and with how especially our childhood plays into our adulthood. Like if I want to get to know somebody real quick, I'm just like, tell me about your childhood. Tell me about your parents. What was your mom like? What was your dad like? And I'm like, okay, you're the mom and you attract the dad or whatever. And it's just such a fascinating topic. So how did you come into this expertise?
Well, I too am always fascinated by human patterning and nature. And so I've been studying psychology since my 20s and also began meditating. And the combination of Western psychology and Eastern mindfulness really became my attention and my focus. And so in my work with people, I would notice these patterns and these generational cycles that people couldn't break, and began to apply it to parenting because I became a mother in this journey and worked with so many parents. And I saw the effects in real time with adult children who were suffering because of childhood. So I began to just apply this new way of thinking to my work and wrote a book called The Conscious Parent, and then wrote several other books on parenting. So my main mission is to help parents become more conscious of the ways in which those generational patterns affect themselves and their children and how to break it. So I have an institute now where I coach people to help parents. I write books on it. I do courses on it all the time. I'm doing a new one in December. So I'm constantly trying to help parents break these patterns. I mean, that's exactly my work, so that the children are not burdened by these generational cycles.
Is there a percentage of the population that has like a secure attachment style versus dismissive or an anxious? Like, how does that break down in society?
What you're referring to are attachment styles, and it's been studied by this woman called Mary Ainsworth, and it's based on John Bowlby's attachment theory. So this is just the background if people wondering what are the styles. So what they did is they like me understand that connection between mother and child, or earliest caregivers and children, are the most pivotal connections that we can make. And when that connection is not solid, then it shows up in our styles, in our patterns. And the more secure that attachment, those early children years are, the more secure we are when we grow up. So in my work, I only see the ones who come in trouble. So for me, I'll say 100% are insecure attachment. But I think there's a truth in that, the reason we're so effed up is because we are insecure within. And why are we insecure? We're insecure because somewhere we believe we're not worthy. Where did this belief system come from? They come from only two places. Number one, from culture. And especially for us girls and women, culture has told us over and over again that there is a way to be a perfect woman. And if you don't follow that way, then you are doomed in a way. So my last book, I don't know whether you have it, I'd love to send it to you, is this book. It's called A Radical Awakening. It's for women, so you should get that. So women especially have been messed up with this cultural message that we're not worthy. And the second place we get this message from is from our parents. And the reason we get this message from our parents is because they have this message that they're not worthy, right? So this is how unworthiness goes over and beyond oneself. So why are we insecure? Because we don't believe we're worthy. So this is what I help parents help their children with, is to help the parents enter a sense of worth and a strong inner connectivity, so that then they will transmit this radiance to their children. But this requires a lot of inner work on part of the parent. The parent has to undo their own inner bullshit that they've inherited from culture. They have to undo their own childhood legacies. So I'm asking parents a tall task to heal their own inner wounds, so that then they can heal their children's.
I think one of the hardest things in my mind is, how do you become aware? Because seeing yourself seems to be really one of the biggest hurdles. Our life is the mirror showing us, but we take it personally. We get triggered, we project. Where does the awareness come in? How do you actually start to, how can you, I watched you talking about narcissism and like something like that. Like, nobody goes into a therapist's office and goes, so I'm a narcissist, or whatever their issue is. You don't walk in with that kind of an awareness. But I really do feel in my heart that most people want to be good and they want a happy life. And, if there was a way to become aware of it, what path would you take people down? How would we get more people to become aware?
So awareness is not a given, and it's not a gift that your partners or your friends will come to you with. Like, hey, I'm aware I'm an asshole. It has happened never, right? That's why we have relationships, because relationships are where you get to see the mirror, and especially parenting. Are you a mom?
I'm not, no.
Okay, you'll see if you ever choose to be a mom that you will be given unlimited opportunities to see how effed up you are. So you'll be very, very grateful. And
my sister has 3 girls, and the other night she put a headset on and sent me a picture, and she goes, I didn't want to kill my kids tonight. So I put the headset on and it's like, she goes, nobody left last night. Everybody's good. But the point is, she's like, she becomes really aware of like, I get triggered when they do this. And, children definitely, but also relationships. I've been through my fair share of relationships, and there's always a new level of awareness. And you think you're going into the next one, like, healed and happy and well, and you're bringing your best, and then somehow you find a new level there too.
Yes. The relationships are the place where you get to see the mirror, but you don't have to look right in the mirror. You can look at it, you can look at the issues, but you can still deflect the reflection. So it really depends on the person's level of truth seeking, the person's level of wanting to create awareness. Growth is so scary for many people because it's taking accountability for your own wounds. And we just would rather blame other people. It's so much more satisfying and easy. But eventually there comes a screeching halt, and it's called rock bottom, where you're like, oh, maybe I'm the common denominator. And that's why with parents, I do the work with parents first, is because you were with your children from the moment they were born. So you gotta look at yourself. And that's why parenting is so good for humanity in a way, because children bring you to your knees, and you can't blame the mother-in-law. You gotta take a look at yourself when it comes to parenting. So in that aspect, children do us a great favor and allow us to take accountability. But again, like you said, it's a really tough nut to crack, because people are so defensive.
Sometimes I like, it's almost when there's a science to things, because it helps me get past it. It's not an opinion or something. It's just how things work. So what is the operating system that exists that keeps you in that projection mode where you're protecting yourself, and you can't see yourself? Like, what is the loop happening? What happens when you choose, or you don't even know how to look at yourself? Like, what's happening that keeps you in this projection loop?
Yeah, great question. It's so funny you're using the word loop, because I'm doing this course in 3 weeks, and I'm talking about loops. And we get into these cycles, and we can't break out. So the reason we're stuck in this loop is because when we get triggered, right, there's an external trigger. We believe that the trigger is because of the external factor. And then we seek to annihilate the trigger. And we seek to control, fix, and manage the trigger. So we try to change the trigger, but the trigger doesn't get changed. The trigger keeps triggering us, and we keep believing it's the trigger, and we keep trying to change the trigger. So we get stuck in this mad loop. If your friend comes late for your birthday party and you get pissed, you then seek to control that behavior in your friend in some way. So you yell, you scream, you don't talk to her. Or your kid says, I hate you, mom. You get pissed. You seek to control that behavior. You yell, scream, punish, and don't talk to your kid, or whatever. Your partner says, hey, honey, I'm not going to be there for your your presentation. You get triggered, you get pissed, you yell and scream. We're just stuck in this little, very tiny circle called a dysfunctional loop. It's so simple and primitive that when you realize how simplistic we are, you'll be shocked, right? Trigger, get angry. Yell at the trigger, control the trigger, end the trigger. Next trigger, same thing. And then we just keep doing the same loop.
Yeah.
What we are missing is many steps in the loop, which we are not seeing. Number one, I teach this, and this is a profound message, but what I teach is that there is no trigger. And people are like, hello, what? Of course there's a trigger. My children are designed to trigger me. They are honed machines. People are designed, the whole world is designed to trigger me. What do you mean there's no trigger? So that in itself is revolutionary, right? And what I say is that there's no trigger on the inside. The only trigger on the outside, there's only a trigger on the inside. There is no trigger on the outside. So that in itself pisses people off, and they want to fire me, and they don't want to come to therapy anymore, because we've been raised to believe that the trigger is on the outside. So I'm delegitimizing their whole basis for their existence. Their existence was like, no, I'm angry. I'm blaming that person. I'm resentful. I'm holding on, because they believe the trigger's on the outside. Now, are there triggers on the outside? Yes. For example, if you got raped, you can't say that that was on the inside, that was on the outside. Or if you get caught in a hurricane, there's a trigger on the outside. Yes, when it comes to our physical safety, physical bondage, there is such a thing as a trigger. So if your husband is beating you up, please, yes, that is not on the inside, that's on the outside. I'm talking about emotional reactivity. All of those triggers are on the inside.
Life is just so nuanced. It's hard to sift through it when you're trying to do it for yourself in an emotional state. So, like, how do you determine the difference between a trigger and just someone being disrespectful or someone not respecting you or your boundaries or, you as a person? Like, what are some ways that we can figure out it's a trigger versus something else?
So you first understand that the trigger is not just on the outside. It's on the inside when it's emotional. Now you turn inward. So the next thing in the loop, instead of fixing, controlling, and killing the trigger, is look inward. You have to do that next vital step to go, okay, how much of this is me? I know it's me also because I'm getting really reactive, right? So my friend came late for the birthday party. That is an event. But it's become a trigger because it's affecting me on the inside. Otherwise, it's just an event. It's neutral. Mm-hmm. Now you look inward and go, why does it bother me so much that I really don't want to talk to this person anymore? Now you investigate. Now you deconstruct. And then you may come to the conclusion, you know what? Because this friend never shows up on time and I take it as a sign of disrespect. Now you can go to the next step. What do I want to do about it? Now you make a choice. Do I want to never speak to this person again because I think it's atrocious? Or can I have a conversation and maybe it's just different styles of cultural, timeliness? Like in India, for example, where I'm from, it's just the culture to not show up on time. It's not disrespectful. But when I came to America, people take it as a sign of disrespect, right? So I'm like, okay, I understand. Now I'll learn. I'll negotiate. So you have to go through a process of inquiry and investigation. But why we get stuck in that loop you talked about is because we are reactive and we are righteous and we believe that the trigger is entirely always external. That mindset has to break if you want to live a better life and a freer life. You have to create that pause between trigger, right? Stimulus and response. It's a basic psychological tool. You have to learn that there are many things happening in between trigger and response that is based on our childhood, based on our mindset, our cultural interpretations. And if we're not skilled or don't want to learn how to be skilled, then fine. Everything will trigger us. No problem. Be trigger happy. And we are a trigger happy culture. And there is no pause. There's no inquiry. And that's why we drink too much and eat too much because everything is triggering us.
Look at how many different things in the world there are with drugs and drinking and all kinds of different things. Even you can go on the healthy side of things. You can exercise too much. You can go on too many trips. Like there's a million ways that you can avoid the issue. What kind of program could you even go into, like getting into a relationship? Say you enter a relationship. Is there some kind of like self-auditing that we could do that would help us enter with more awareness? Is there like ground rules that we should have? I mean, it's one thing to have your parents and your family, but it's another thing in a relationship where you're actively making a decision to be in it. How do you enter into that with the best of potential to be able to work through things? Because the point is that relationships, I think that in life, we're meant to kind of uncover this stuff. We're meant to grow, we're meant to evolve, and relationships give us that opportunity, but they usually end in such disaster because we just take everything so personally and we can't deal with it. And we think it's someone else's fault. I don't know. I wonder if there's what can we do when we enter a relationship to give us a healthy chance and a healthy opportunity to be honest and share and not be offended?
Yeah, I think it's, your own inner healing that you've done on your own path, and then really choosing a person who you can grow with. But that doesn't mean forever and posterity, but it means that it's not just blatant dumping and emotional venting, but there's an opportunity because each person is working on their own healing. So at first we choose partners just based on chemical attraction or physical proximity or, financial need. And those are the wrong reasons to choose a partner. they can be eventual reasons, and they're good reasons, but they're not the first reasons. The first reason to choose a partner is a person that you match with in terms of your spiritual signature, in terms of your emotional healing. And you have to really put emotional health as a top priority right after, the cuteness factor, if you want. But it's got to be right up there. How emotionally literate are these people? How emotionally articulate? How emotionally cognizant are they? Self-literacy, self-awareness is number one. And if that is not placed as number one in our school curriculums, in our relationship curriculums, in our parenting curriculums, we're doomed. Then that's why we are doomed, because self-awareness is nowhere in a educational curriculum. It's nowhere in the parenting paradigm, and it's not there in the relationship paradigm. We go into these dynamics of relationships and parenting expecting the other to meet our needs. And the other never ever really can ever fulfill our needs completely or long lastingly or consistently, because the other person is deeply flawed. And so we are really in relationships with ourselves and others that are deeply flawed. But we go in with such high expectations that the other will meet our needs because we're special. And I tell people all the time, you're not special. You're unique. You ain't special, sweetheart, and to the universe, you're just a speck of dust. So the reason we take it all personally is because we have expectations, these grandiose fantasies that the other is meant to complete us. The other is meant to fix us. The other is meant to mommy and daddy us. And the other is a deeply flawed child looking for you to do the same thing. So now we're competing,
How do we find that awareness?
By putting self-awareness as a top priority in your own life.
What does that look like?
Therapy, taking courses, meditating. That part of our life has been so denied by culture because it's not about being rich. It's not about being successful. It's not about getting a trophy or a prize. It's not about being skinny. So that part is a private part. It's entering solitude. It's sitting and meditating every day. It's writing in a journal. It's talking to a therapist, is taking a course. It's very unglamorous and unromantic. And it's something you do because you want to have a deeper connection with yourself. But we've been trained to not have deep connections with ourselves. We've been trained to have deep connections with the external world. This is the fundamental sickness of our world, is we've been trained to look outward, to look outside. Like the children are more important, the husband is more important, the partner is more important, the lover is more important, what other people think is more important. And we've lost connection with ourselves. But in essence, our relationship with ourselves needs to be number one. Now, people will say, especially women, that that's so selfish. It's not selfish, because when you have a flourishing relationship with yourself, you need other people less. And because you need them less, you suck on them less. Mm-hmm. And because you suck on them less, you're less angry with them. So they're actually better off when you focus on yourself, and people don't realize that. Sure. Because again, our eyes are conditioned to look outward. So that's why Eastern mindfulness in my life has been the key, because I can always come back to that quiet place within myself. Mm-hmm. And I've developed a very robust relationship with my own inner voice. Mm-hmm. So I talk to myself. I listen to myself. I first check in with Shefali. So that takes off so much burden of my friends, my lovers, my partners, my children, like my parents. Like I'm dealing with my own self. I'm adulting myself. I'm parenting myself. Now, I don't do this all the time and I don't do it perfectly, but I know that is the first ally. That is the first step. So you ask, what should people do? Well, they should take that relationship very seriously and go to therapy and take courses and learn about who it is they are. Mm-hmm. And we as parents need to do that. That's why I teach parents to do that, so that we can cultivate in our children that autonomy, that inner interdependence.
What have you done with your daughter? How old is your daughter now? You have one child, right?
Yes, she's almost 19. Okay.
This would be fascinating. Like, how have you parented her?
Well, I've parented her with a lot of bloodshed, meaning I've messed up and effed up a lot. So that has, Yeah, but through that I learn, and I teach others how to mess up less. So I've at least used her as the muse and the scapegoat to help other parents not do it, because I get it. When I make a mistake, I'm like, shit, and this is why I did it, and now let me teach other people. So I have to have a muse, and she's my muse. But I've tried to do what I teach, at least half of the time, which is to release her to her own life and not take it as an affront or an applause to my life. It's her own life.
Mhm.
And I've constantly given her the baton to make those decisions. You know what you want to eat, check in with your body. You know what you want to wear, check in with your body. And if I do have an opinion, I say it age appropriately. So now she's 19. You can't really have an opinion with a 19-year-old. But if I see her dressing, a bit too risque, instead of saying don't be a slut, which is what I want to say, I'll say instead, I would reconsider, how close to showing your nipples you are. I'll try and tell her in a gentle way, because I want her to make her own decision, and I can't. What I want to do is lock her in a box and keep her safe and protected, but I know I can't. So as parents, we need to release children to their own life wisdom, to their own body wisdom, to their own self wisdom. And it's hard with kids because they don't have much wisdom. So it's like, hello, you have zero wisdom. I see you being a total idiot, moron. What, Dr. Shefali, how do I release her to her wisdom when there's no wisdom? Yeah, but giving your child your wisdom is a surefire way that they won't develop their wisdom. You understand?
It's the same pattern.
Yeah, so it's really hard though, as I feel for parents, because there's nobody more idiotic than a teenager, really. They're really, really not so smart. And so you have to really have a lot of patience and trust to release them to their own wisdom, hoping that they have it. But I will tell you, out of jest, taking myself out of the funny part of it, is that actually we all do have wisdom. It just takes cultivation. Mm-hmm. So I know as a parent, if I just let her make her mistakes enough, wisdom will come. Where does wisdom come from? It comes from error. It comes from trial and practice and from making mistakes. So releasing children to making their own mistakes is torturous for the parent, because we know what they should do, but allowing them to experience the casualty of their own foolishness is counterintuitively the way to create wisdom.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine how hard it is to give them enough rope to hang themselves. And,
yes.
It's part of the growth. My parents let me move to England when I was 16 years old and left high school and lived there on my own without family. And I'm sure that I know that's what helped me grow and become the person that I did, because I had that enough rope. And of course I hung myself a little bit, but I'm curious, like, what happens from a young age? I feel like I go up to a kid and I'm like, you see this little girl and you think she looks adorable and you're like, oh my God, you're so cute. But I'm like, no, I'm like, wow, did you pick your outfit out today? And like starting to ask questions from a different perspective. And these are just my like tiny little ways that I approach children. And I'm like, that was a great question. I'm so glad you asked it, and things that aren't about the superficial. So anyway, the point is like, what have you done with your daughter to, because you can't completely avoid the patterning that you have. Like, you are living your life, and by nature it's transmitting it to her by proximity. So what are the tools that you try and embed in a young child early on that gives them the ability to see what's going on, have accountability, be able to make decisions for themselves, things like that? What can you do at the younger ages?
Yes. So the most powerful thing we can do as parents is take care of our own expectations and fulfill our own cup of fulfillment and happiness, so that we are not sucking our children and the identity of being a parent and using that identity to fulfill ourselves, which is what many parents do. They use their children as proxy surrogate, buckets to fill their own well-being. Your kid is your kid. They are in their own lane, their own destiny. You are their guide, and that's about it. But people equate parenting as I own you, I control you, and you are here to make me feel comfortable and good about being a parent. And that's the mess up, right? So becoming aware that we have to become whole in ourselves is the best gift you can give your kids. When your kid sees that mom is happy, even when I get a C grade, and mom is happy, regardless of whether I never get an A grade, that is so freeing to the kid. When they see that mom is happy when I win the baseball trophy or the hockey tournament, and that's what gives her happiness, now you subconsciously put pressure on the kid that oh shoot, I exist for my mom. Parents need to exist for themselves, kids need to exist for themselves. So I was aware of that as a mom, and really had my own career, my own fulfilling practices, and try to do both, be there for the kid because kids need parents a lot, but also be there for my own fulfillment. So my joy was not based on the kid. There's this adage in parenting, you're only as happy as your least happy child. And I get that, but that's a bunch of bullshit. You should be happy no matter what. Your kid is unhappy. Why are you unhappy, right? But that's what we propagate subconsciously. We teach parents to be enmeshed and dependent on their children. No, teach kids that you're going to be happy. Of course, it pains you that they're in pain, but pain is a beautiful thing. So the next thing I would say for parents to do is honor feelings. Let feelings be feelings. Let the kid have their own feelings. We try to control our children's feelings. We suppress our children's feelings because they make us uncomfortable. So when you're comfortable with your own self, you allow your kid to be comfortable. And then I would say, especially if you're a mother of a girl, be very careful about your own body image. Be careful about how you're communicating your own life story to your daughter, especially, and also to your son. How are you communicating how women should be treated? How are you communicating how worthy you feel in your essence versus your exterior? And, I remember once my daughter at a party in front of everyone, I was wearing a sleeveless dress, said, "Oh, mom, let me see. Oh, look at your jiggly arms. Show people your jiggly like helicopters," right? And I was like, is this kid a nut job? I'm going to punish her, What the hell is wrong with her? But of course, I laughed at myself because I had done enough work. And I was like, outed. This is what kids will do. They will point out all your flaws because they don't see it as flaws. So I was like, here you go, everybody. And I made everybody show their helicopter arms. And then I told my daughter, so sad you don't have your helicopter arms yet because you can't fly yet. And look at me, I've got plenty, something like that. Yeah. But my instinct was to get upset. My instinct was to say, I don't have helicopter arms. I have muscle. Look at my muscle up here. This is down here. And justify and defend. But, or one day my daughter came and said, oh, mommy, I don't want to get fat or something, or I don't want to something about fat. And I said, I wanted to say to her, my reaction again was like, are you so silly? You're so skinny. I wish I was skinny like you, right? That was my instinct. But because I knew this was coming, and, when you're a mother of a daughter, you have to be aware of these issues. Yeah. I said to her, if you're fat, you're fat. If you're skinny, you're skinny. Today you're fat, tomorrow you're skinny. Love your body no matter what, Maya, something like that, But my instinct again was to adulate skinnydom because culture adulates skinny bodies. So you have to be mindful of these messages, and let me tell you, even though I was mindful, I've really messed up. So it's not like some perfection that I'm trying to convey. I'm just conveying an aspiration and to be careful, but we don't have to be so perfect because no matter what you do, you're going to mess up because it's a lifelong journey of so many moments and no one is perfect,
Yeah. The whole vibe of it smells like codependency. Would that be the right way to describe, especially maybe it's just a generational thing and patterning, but it seems worse in women.
Yeah, it's worse in women because women have been trained that their identity is through the relationship. So that's why mothers enmesh with their children more. And part of it is because we are caregivers, so we are lovely, but our loveliness becomes codependent enmeshment very quickly because we've been trained from an early age.
Can you actually just give a good explanation of codependency? Because I think these are the things too that, we hear it and oh my God, I would have never said I'm codependent. I'm like, I'm a strong woman. I buy my own houses. I do my own things. I make my own money. I'm, all kinds of reasons why I don't feel like I'm not codependent. And then I realized I'm totally codependent. Well, I was much more codependent. And so I think it's a great time to just explain what that is. Because, 50% of people probably have it,
Yeah, so codependency is a specific condition which is different from interdependency. Okay, so codependency is a psychological term that we throw around, which signifies that your identity is really dependent on the other person's moods, emotions, and energy.
Sure.
So you can't hold on to your own autonomous connection with yourself and allow the other person to have their own connection with yourself, which is a healthy interdependence. But instead, you get deeply affected by the other person's moods, energies, emotions, and thought processes. So there's this entangling that we do. And women tend to do it more, again, because our nature is to care. But then culture has really effed us up in telling us that, oh, caring is a good person, and a good person really cares. So therefore, really caring is managing the other person's moods and emotions. And that's where we go into the other person's lane and we mess it up, right? So then we become codependent. What that means in layman's terms is we lose ourselves in the relationship. And I tell people all the time, you came lost. You didn't lose yourself. You came lost. And you can only blame the other person so much, because if you stay in a toxic relationship, then it's all on you, right? One time it's on them, 2 times it's on them, 3 months it's on them, 6 years it's on them, but 25 years is on you, right? So that's where you have to take full responsibility for our co-creation.
What are some ways that we can double check if we're being codependent or not? I'm kind of curious about it from a codependent side, which I'm really into attachment theory, and then maybe we'll go into the other side of it where it's on the other end of the spectrum, because and you're the professional, but there's a lot of both of those, right? There's a lot of the codependent anxious, and then there's a lot of the dismissive avoidant kind of disassociative. So like
2 extremes, right? One is avoid personality and one is insecure, anxious personality, right?
Right.
And you want to be either. Right.
And they both source from a very, like, how do you get to each of those attachments? And then if we could go into each attachment and style of relating and patterning, and how, like, just ways we can check in with ourselves as to whether or not we're in one of those. Like, where does it source from? Because how do you become one or the other?
Okay, so it comes from childhood, right? So the anxious, insecure type is temperamental, where they learned to read other people's moods because they were more sensitive. They were able to read. So they began to base their psyche on the other person's energies. The more disorganized, avoidant type personality is more compartmentalized, less enmeshed, and they just deny, and they're more masculine energy. So it could come from temperament, it could come from your own parenting. And I always tell people, don't worry about where it comes from. Look at what it is. It doesn't matter. What is it now? It doesn't matter what you were yesterday. It doesn't matter. But what are you currently? And the person can say something like, well, I'm constantly upset and affected. That's it. So if you're constantly upset and affected, you have to look at why. And the person will say, because he, because she, because they. And it's the same cycle, right? So no, it isn't because of them. It's because of your co-creation. So become aware of how you're setting up the dynamics for you to be upset. Yeah, they're doing them beautifully, but you're doing you beautifully. So I often tell very empathic women who are often in relationships with more narcissistic men, yeah, they are doing their narcissism down pat, but they can only succeed because you're doing your empathic, bleeding empath, boundaryless, spineless human down pat, right? You're not able to check in with yourself and stand up for yourself. So the narcissist is more narcissistic. So each creates the monster in the other. So we have to take 100% accountability for our own misery until we get to a place of 100% accountability, not 50-50. I recently went through a divorce, and in my book, A Radical Awakening, I talk about it, that this whole paradigm of 50-50 is bullshit, because it's 50-50 ego. When you take 100% accountability, I'm not saying responsibility, but accountability for your happiness, you end the ego games. So I did my divorce 100 to 0, like no 50-50. I didn't look for 50-50. I looked for 100-0, and I could fly through it so fast because I wasn't looking for 50. You see, when you do 50-50, you're waiting for your other half of the pie. You're waiting for, okay, I said this, now you say this. But when you choose to be liberated, you take 100% accountability.
Yeah.
You give things a chance to be 50-50, but ultimately to change the pattern, you have to take 100% accountability. And this is where I get the most resistance from people, because they're like, no, but he, but she, but he.
Of course. And it isn't that people aren't wrong. It's not that people aren't wrong. It's just that if you want to participate in that same pattern over and over again, keep playing. Exactly. But if you don't like it, then you have to realize that it's your participation in it that keeps it alive.
Correct.
And that acting in a certain way gets that result. And this is the kind of person you're attracting. Like, I had patterning myself, and I'm like, it took a couple, and I was like, oh, okay. And then it totally changes things.
Yes. And ultimately, spiritual teachers often talk about, ultimately, you have to make a choice. And this is what we resist the most, because it's adulting. To make a choice is to be an adult.
Adulting's hard.
Adulting is hard. You want the choice made for you. Sometimes women come to me, and this is just to be taken lightly, and they're like, I wish he would just die. And I tell them, I hear you. You would rather the person die. You'd rather your kids suffer rather than you make a choice, right? They're like, yeah, I don't want to make a choice. I want him to be dead, right?
Oh my God, because something in them has to die. That's the problem. Is they'd rather someone else die than them, because you have to die to parts of you to grow. It's like, beautiful. Before I want to close the loop, I want to close the loop on the more avoidant style real quick, and just checking in with that. But then I want to get into this transformation, and I always say growing pains. There's always pain in growing, and like the alchemy happens in the pit of hell, when you can't feel like you're in misery. But let's close the loop on the avoidant side.
So
and then we'll get
avoidant people are more compartmentalized by temperament or their own upbringing, and they tend to distract and numb and go to another source. Mm-hmm. So the insecure, anxious one begins to attach parasitically to the person, and the avoidant avoids the person and the relationship and goes to a substance or to a thing and to a new hobby, and that's very hurtful for the other person.
Oh, it's the ultimate pain for it's the ultimate pain for an anxious person.
Yes, and that's the two who attract each other, and they keep the dance going. And so, for the avoidant person to wake up to their patterns is to notice they'll be spending too much money, they'll be spending too much time watching porn, they'll be spending hours on the couch in a video game. Their avoidance will catch up with them. Mm-hmm. And hopefully then they can see that they've been numbing because they've learned to run away from their feelings and run away from conflict. So there's a lot of pain in both sides, and they have to do that inner work. And so let's come to transformation. So how does transformation really occur is, you said the dying within the self, and encountering our own death in terms of our psychological death of pieces of ourselves that are negative and dysfunctional is the hardest thing, right? So I called my divorce not a divorce to the person. I called my divorce a divorce from my own authenticity. Mm. I finally said no more to my own game playing, to my own role playing, to my own inauthentic self. Mm. And in my saying no, the marriage couldn't sustain itself. No problem. Sometimes it can sustain. No, it doesn't matter. You have to be willing to say no more to parts of your own dysfunction. And when you reach that rock bottom moment, you will. So I often tell people who come to me for help, come back to me in a few years because you aren't at rock bottom yet. You're in complaint. You just want to complain. And I tell them, okay, you understand, you just want to complain. I'm taking money just to listen to you complain. And then they are jolted because they realize they've just spent thousands of dollars complaining. I keep giving them the carrot. This is what you have to do. And let me just talk about the choice. How do you begin to make change? Ultimately, it comes down to growing up and making a choice. And there are only three choices: accept where you are, and then zip it and just do what you're doing. The next thing is change. And yes, sure, try to change the other person. Take them for AA. Send them to Deepak Chopra's courses. Take them to Dr. Shefali. Try your best to change them. At some point, you realize if it's not working, maybe I have to change myself. And then the third choice, so change is change the other or change yourself. And then the third choice, which is only to be done with caution and not through impulsivity, is you leave. So accept it the way it is, meaning it is what it is. It's 80-20, 90-10, 0-0, whatever you do, accept it.
0-0.
Whatever it is, accept it and continue. Like, so many times women will come to me, right? And they be like, I hate my partner and I want to leave the marriage. So I'm like, okay, wow, you want to make a change? Let's do it. And then when we begin to talk about change, they're like, oh, but I love my swimming pool, but I don't know how I'll manage on that allowance, or what will I do here? And I go, you don't want to change because change means death. Yeah. You want to complain. Let's complain. Okay, let's have a drink together and complain, right? So I show people that they want to stay stuck, actually. So then I teach them, just accept.
And then they just love you for that, don't they? They're just like, thank you, Dr. Shefali. That's exactly what I wanted to hear.
Many times
it's how you get them to do something.
Right. But many times the answer is to accept. For example, many women are stuck without money in a relationship with 16 children. And they're like, where am I going to go? So I'm like, you're right. Now you had 16 children, accept it. Accept that he snores at night. Accept that he's a jerk. What to do? You got the swimming pool, you got the 16 children. You know what I'm saying? However, when it comes to physical abuse, I'm very dogmatic. I'm like, no, you need to take care of yourself and leave now. Right. But if it's, otherwise life is nuanced. So you have to weigh, and I can't judge and tell you leave. I can't judge and tell you to stay. You have to make that equation for yourself, right? So I teach people, I empower people to make their own equations. But it always boils down to, are you willing to really die? Because that's what change means. Or let's look at other options, such as accept the situation. How can we accept it? Maybe you go to the basement, he goes to the roof. How can we make this palatable? Because you're not ready to die yet. And that's okay. But let's not pretend we're ready to die and waste all this money in therapy,
Right. And therapy is a great way to, therapists, and I've worked with many over time, and even just taking courses and doing things, and the prompts are really helpful, and, the talking through things, and, also verbally saying things is a whole nother level to get things out of your mouth that's been in your body and your head. But I would say, but it's also possible to do a lot of things on your own. And some people might not have the means to do therapy, and it could take years, for someone to really get to the point that they're ready to open up or hit a rock bottom of some sort. So I've had a lot of my actual biggest breakthroughs most of them have been on my own, and through being in a pattern, or through admitting certain things to myself and what I don't want anymore and what I deserve and things like that. And the process of dying is it really is hard. And I'm wondering if you can kind of help give a picture of what that looks like, and when someone can actually know if they're not in therapy, when they have gone through that, because I feel that people cut themselves pretty short. I feel like a lot of times there's discomfort, but then, that's not really where the alchemy is. It's in a lot deeper layers and levels and emotional depth and breaking down. And so, how does that normally look for people?
So I think that you've been admirable in your own endeavors to heal yourself, but I do encourage people to hire someone, because like you said, when you hear yourself talking loudly and you're witnessed by a third-party observer, they can point out things that sometimes we cannot. So how does one do it on one's own? Is first understand that you may not be able to do it on your own, and it's okay to get help. But some of the things to do on your own are to, again, Okay, if I was to take 100% accountability right now and somebody was to tell me my pattern flaws, what would they be? You have to do that self-investigation and break down the last fight you have. I always go to the last conflict and I make them draw it out. Okay, this was the trigger. These were my thoughts and feelings about the trigger. Where did it come from? What did it make me feel like inside? What was my inner child feeling? How did my ego react? And I teach people how to do this loop building and breaking down. So there has to be some education. You can't just do it on your own.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you begin to see your pattern in it. And then you say, okay, what would it take for me to 100% break that pattern? Okay, I say yes too many times. Okay, where can I begin to say no? Where can I begin to take care of myself better? Where can I stand up for myself and speak the truth more? And you have to then, so I did this in my divorce. I told myself I would not say yes anymore till I was completely sure it was a yes. Because my pattern was to give of myself to make others happy. And then I was burning out and I was resentful. So I began to give myself a test. Okay, check in with yourself before you open your mouth. And if it's not genuine, not authentic, and not coming from a full place, don't do it. Don't say yes. So I began to not only not say yes, I began to not talk. Because every time I began to check in, it was fake. It was, I needed this person to like me, or I wanted that person to love me, and I was like, wow, I am really in a persona of myself, and I'm not in the anchored place of self-awareness and self-connection.
Did you feel lonely?
I was in a very active, fertile state of transformation. So I was determined to break my patterns. So it was not about loneliness. It was about really entering the beauty of my aloneness and finding myself again, and wanting to show my daughter that women can be authentic and free, and showing my ex that I didn't want to be the old me, and that it wasn't about him, it was about me. So it was a very active, fertile exploration where, and I tell people that if you want to change patterns, it is an introspective process. It is a journey inward. So it looks less social, but you're getting to socialize with yourself for the first time in your life.
Yeah. And I found too that a lot of times, not only relationships fall away of all kinds, not just the romantic ones, but sometimes friends and other people and jobs and where you live. And, that's kind of, the new life is going to cost you your old life saying, and that sounds really scary to people, but it's the only way to true happiness.
It is, but we're scared of that tunnel and we're scared of the new. And that's why until we hit rock bottom in the old, no one is changing. As a therapist for over 25 years, I know that people will not change till they hit rock bottom. So my goal is to show people that it's not working. We're so afraid in this culture of fake happiness to admit that things are not working. But in the admittance that things are not working, beautiful evolutions are possible. But if we're attached to the facade, then we are never going to allow a new us to emerge. And, culture has told us that longevity is the goal of marriage and longevity is the goal of relationships. And so it shames us when we want to move on.
It's like, I think it's so sad to think that if something ends, it's a failure.
Yes.
It might mean growth too.
Oh, nothing ends. That doesn't mean growth.
Right.
It absolutely means growth.
Right.
And it takes courage for people to end things. You only end things because you're brave enough to see that there's something better for you. And it's never a wrong thing. When people get divorced, I'm just speaking out of my personal experience, people, came to me and said, oh, I'm so sorry. And I was like, who are you sorry for? People don't come to a divorce or a change in a relationship out of a weakness. They come out of strength and power. Yeah. And
for sure. But someone can leave because of a pattern too. What if someone's shifting and they just don't like the pattern anymore. And the person that's being left doesn't even realize that's what's happening. There is sometimes transformation that's happening that disrupts the pattern as well. That doesn't always mean that the one leaving is strong. That's what I'm saying. Like sometimes when you change, things around you fall away.
Yes.
And you don't even quite become aware of it, because the stuff that happens, for me, it's been like the stuff that happens physically, emotionally, mentally, tangibly, aren't all at the same exact time.
Exactly. So you're right. But even though it's not conscious, the fact that it's a change means growth is happening.
Yeah.
So it may not be the growth at the level of death that we talked about, but it's growth. So meaning when you send your kid as a parent to university, right, by doing that and taking them out of your zip code and neighborhood, change is happening and growth is happening. So change is inevitable. And you're right that growth can be unconsciously happening, and we want it to be conscious, but change is always good. Like I've never seen a change that's negative. It's only negative because we resist it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true. I'm going to wrap up here by just asking you, I love to hear that when you were young, you loved to ask all kinds of questions, ask big questions, introspective questions. And I'm wondering what now at this point in your life are your questions?
My questions are, for me professionally, is how to make consciousness more palatable for lay people. So I wrote all these very philosophical parenting books that helped people, but I'm now giving people more concrete tools. I'm writing another book on parenting that's more of a method. So professionally, I'm always looking for ways to help people to suffer less. And I think personally, I'm looking for ways to grow and make parts of myself so much more whole that I'm not giving into culture's subscriptions out of fear. So I'm always trying to develop myself so I'm more whole within, so I don't give into these cultural pressures. Culture has so much pressure on us, and I find myself sometimes giving into it and becoming inauthentic. So personally, that's my, how can I become more authentic, and how can I help others suffer less?
Big questions and big hopes for sure. There's a lot of people suffering from so many of these things. I mean, social media is wonderful and it's awful. It's the ultimate duality of things. Everything is, it's kind of stemming from the same source, but all part of the same whole. And the expressions are all over the place. And I think we're in a really interesting time in culture right now where things are so getting pulled apart in different directions.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the time and sharing your experience and your knowledge, and ultimately just helping people become more accountable. If there was one thing in my life, people ask me, like, what are you most proud of? And I was like, well, I think you're probably asking about like my racing career or something like that, about my life. What am I proud of? And my answer is always these days now, becoming fully accountable. When my therapist said the words, "No one holds the keys," I was like, oh, shit. I was like, that's a lot of responsibility. And I cried, but it was the best day.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's been a pleasure, Danica. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Shefali.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to the Pretty Intense podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you heard today and you want to hear more, please click on the subscribe button.